You know that feeling when you're the last person to realize you're the butt of a cosmic joke? Yeah, that was me last month. They say hindsight is 20/20ths, but in my case, it came with a side of champagne, a canceled wedding, and a newfound appreciation for singlehood. If you're here for a story of love, betrayal, and poetic justice, grab your popcorn because this one's a doozy. Let me set the stage for you. My name's Ryan, and up until a few weeks ago, I was just your average guy planning a wedding to the love of my life. Or so I thought. Emma and I had been together for 6 years, engaged for nearly 2. She was the kind of woman who lit up every room she walked into, the perfect blend of charm, wit, and intelligence. Or, as it turns out, just a very convincing actress. We had everything ready. The venue booked, the invitation sent, the cake tasting done. I'd spent months sweating over every detail because I wanted it to be perfect for her. The perfect day, the perfect life, the perfect future. But perfect is a funny word, isn't it? It implies you've already found your happy ending when, in reality, I was just standing in the prologue of my personal disaster novel. It started subtly. Emma came home one day bubbling with excitement about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a 3-week tour through South Asia with her old university friends. At first, I was on board. She'd always had a wanderlust streak, and I figured some time away might help her relax before the chaos of wedding planning kicked into high gear. But then came the kicker. As I was helping her pack, she dropped the brake bomb. She didn't call it a breakup. Oh no, that would have been too honest. She called it space to reflect before we take the next step. Reflect on what? I had no idea, but like a fool, I nodded along, thinking it was just pre-wedding jitters. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Looking back, her timing was impeccable. She told me this as we were unloading her bags at the airport. With my jaw still hanging open, she hugged me, said thank you for understanding, and disappeared into the crowd like a magician exiting stage left. I stood there for a solid 5 minutes trying to process what had just happened. The confusion quickly turned into something worse when I tried calling her later that day, only to find myself blocked. Not just on calls, but on every possible platform, text, social media, even Venmo. I couldn't tell if she wanted a break or if she'd entered the witness protection program. At first, I chalked it up to stress or travel chaos. Surely, she'd come to her senses in a day or two, right? But as the hours stretched into days, it became painfully clear this wasn't just about space. It was about to get so much worse. You'd think getting blocked by your fiancé would be the low point of any relationship. Turns out I was wrong, because while I was staring at my silent phone, wondering if I'd accidentally agreed to a vacation and a breakup, Emma was busy turning her space to reflect into a world tour of bad decisions. Let me tell you about the day the silence finally broke. It wasn't a heartfelt email or a surprise call from an international number. No, it was an Instagram post. There she was sipping something colorful from a coconut, smiling like she didn't just leave her fiancé in the dust. The caption? Finding myself in paradise. Sometimes you need to lose yourself to truly be free. Lose herself? I nearly choked on my coffee. She wasn't lost. She was tagging photos of herself in front of temples and waterfalls with captions that read like a self-help book for people who ghost their partners. And the kicker? Every picture had the same guy in the background, a tall, tanned, dreadlocked walking cliché of a spiritual guide. He wasn't exactly subtle either, with his arm casually draped around her in one photo and a comment on another that read, "So much light in this connection." Dizzy. Light? I was seeing red. For the next few days, I became what I can only describe as a professional overthinker. I dissected every detail of her posts, zooming in like I was CSI, Relationship Edition. Who was this guy? Was he just a friend? Was she reflecting with him now? My head told me I should let it go, but my gut told me I was missing the full picture. It wasn't just Instagram that set me off. Our mutual friends started reaching out, asking why Emma had removed them from her socials. She hadn't just blocked me. She'd gone full scorched earth, cutting off anyone connected to our life back home. Her trip had gone from a once-in-a-lifetime experience to what looked suspiciously like a digital witness relocation program. I couldn't confront her directly, so I did the next best thing. I canceled the wedding. Quietly at first, I called the venue, the florist, the caterers. One by one, I unraveled the plans we'd spent 2 years building. Each call was like tearing a bandage off a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. When the venue manager asked if I'd like to postpone instead of cancel, I almost laughed. Postpone for what? For Emma to finish her spiritual awakening and come back with a travel buddy? After a week of silence, I made a decision. If she wanted her freedom, she could have it, but she wasn't dragging me along for the ride. I posted a brief update in our wedding group chat. Hey everyone, just a heads up. The wedding's off, and so is the relationship. Emma and I are going our separate ways. Thanks for your understanding. The group chat exploded, as expected. People were shocked, confused, and, honestly, a little too invested in the drama. One of Emma's bridesmaids called me immediately, demanding to know what had happened. I kept it simple. Ask Emma. She's finding herself in South Asia with some guy who likes coconuts. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the end of the day, half her friends knew the story, or at least my version of it. I thought Emma would be furious when she found out, but to my surprise, she reached out. A different number, no doubt borrowed from one of her enlightened travel buddies. She called me at 3 a.m., the sound of waves crashing in the background. Ryan, she said, her voice as breezy as her vacation posts. I'll be back Thursday morning. Can you pick me up from the airport? I sat there in silence for a moment, letting the sheer audacity of her words wash over me. Thursday? Back? Airport? It was as if the past 2 weeks hadn't happened, like she expected me to be sitting at home, waiting patiently for her to grace me with her presence. You have the wrong number, I said flatly, and hung up. But that wasn't the end. If you think Emma took that as a hint, you don't know Emma. Emma's return felt like the climax of a movie I didn't ask to star in. I hadn't seen or heard from her since that surreal phone call where she casually announced her flight details like nothing had happened. By the time her plane landed, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. But Emma? Oh, she had no idea. The day she was set to arrive, I prepared, not with anticipation or hope, but with clarity. I spent the morning tidying up my apartment, which now looked more like a bachelor pad than the home we'd shared. Gone were the engagement photos, the vision boards for our wedding, and the cute little reminders of us. Everything tied to her was neatly packed into a box labeled Emma's stuff, sitting in the hallway like an abandoned relic. Around 6 p.m., the inevitable happened. My phone buzzed with a text. Hey, I'm here. Can you come pick me up? No hello, no explanation. Just an expectation that I'd be waiting like a loyal dog. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the absurdity of it sink in. Then I sent her a one-liner that I knew would hit harder than silence. You'll need this more than you'll need me, followed by the number of the local taxi service. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised. Emma never was one to take a hint. When I opened the door, there she stood, suitcase in hand, wearing an expression that was part exhaustion, part smugness. It was as though she expected this to be one of those movie moments where the guy throws his arms around the girl, and they cry, and everything goes back to normal. Spoiler alert, that wasn't happening. Ryan, she began, her tone soft, almost rehearsed. I could tell she'd spent the cab ride practicing whatever speech she thought would win me over. But I wasn't interested in listening. Before you say anything, I interrupted, stepping aside, take a look around. She stepped into the apartment, dragging her suitcase behind her, and froze. The realization hit her like a cold wave. The closet where her clothes had once hung in neat rows was empty. The bookshelf where she'd insisted on displaying her travel souvenirs was bare. Even the magnet-covered fridge that had once showcased our shared milestones was clean, sterile, like none of it had ever existed. Her gaze landed on the box in the hallway. "Where's my stuff?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion and, for the first time, panic. "In the box," I said simply. "Everything you left behind. Seemed fair since you left me behind, too." The words were sharper than I expected, but I didn't regret them. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, I walked over to the counter and grabbed a stack of printed screenshots. Instagram posts, captions, and comments. All her spiritual journey nonsense. I handed them to her without a word. She flipped through the pages, her face draining of color as she reached the photos with the dreadlocked spiritual guide, who seemed to be in every frame. Her hands trembled slightly. "Ryan, it's not what it looks like," she started, her voice cracking. "Doesn't matter what it looks like, Emma," I said, cutting her off. "It matters what it is. You left, you blocked me, and then you paraded this whole finding yourself charade like I wouldn't notice. Well, congratulations. You found yourself. But you lost me." Her lips quivered, but she tried to hold her composure. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, almost pleading. "We could have talked." I almost laughed. Talk? She'd blocked me on every platform for 2 weeks, and now she wanted to talk? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Emma, the talking part ended when you chose to disappear. This is me responding in kind." I grabbed her suitcase and rolled it out onto the porch. "Here's the thing about breaks," I said, looking her square in the eye. "They're permanent if you push someone far enough." I shut the door before she could respond, leaving her standing on the porch with her suitcase and her regrets. For a few minutes, I stood behind the door, listening to the sound of her shuffling feet. She didn't knock again. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she finally understood she couldn't charm her way out of this one. Emma didn't give up as easily as I hoped. A few days passed after I sent her packing, and just when I thought she might actually stay gone, she came back swinging. Not literally, of course, but her attempts to claw her way back into my life were as subtle as a sledgehammer. It started with texts, long, rambling ones that swung between apologetic and defensive, as if she couldn't decide whether to beg for forgiveness or convince me she wasn't wrong in the first place. "Ryan, I made a mistake. I got caught up in the moment. Can we please talk?" That was one of her more coherent attempts. Most of them were laced with excuses about how the trip had been a wake-up call and how she'd realized what really matters. What really matters? I almost laughed out loud when I read that. If what mattered was our relationship, maybe she wouldn't have ghosted me while gallivanting around South Asia with a wannabe guru. But instead of engaging, I did what I should have done from the start. I ignored her. Then came the gifts. Yes, gifts. As if a few tokens of goodwill could erase the mess she'd made. First, there was the handwritten letter left in my mailbox, tucked into a box of cookies from a bakery she knew I liked. I didn't read the letter. I didn't need to. The cookies were good, though. Next came a framed photo of us from a trip we'd taken to the mountains 2 years ago. Attached was a note that said, "This is what I want to get back to. Please don't give up on us." I stared at the photo for a long time before setting it aside. I couldn't decide what annoyed me more, the manipulation or the fact that she thought this was enough to undo everything. But the final straw was her grand gesture. She showed up at my office. It was a Tuesday mid-afternoon. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant buzzed me. "Ryan, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "She says it's urgent." I didn't need to ask who it was. Sure enough, when I stepped out, there she was in the lobby, holding a bouquet of flowers so large it looked like she was hiding behind it. I stood there for a moment, staring at her. The sight was almost comical, a grand, romantic gesture straight out of a rom-com, except the only thing I felt was irritation. "Emma," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "What are you doing here?" She launched into her rehearsed speech. "Ryan, I know I messed up. I was confused, but I've realized how much I love you, and I don't want to lose you." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and glistening with what I assumed were crocodile tears. "Please, let's try again. We can still have the life we planned." I let her finish because, honestly, I wanted to see how far she'd take this. When she was done, I crossed my arms and gave her the kind of look that could cut glass. "Emma, you already lost me," I said, my voice calm but cold. This is damage control, not love." Her face fell, but I didn't stop. "You wanted a break, and you got one. You wanted to find yourself, and you did. Now it's my turn to move on." For a moment, she just stood there, the flowers wilting slightly under the fluorescent lights. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She set the bouquet down on the counter, turned, and walked out without another word. No dramatic exit, no tears, no pleading. Just silence. I thought that was the end of it, and for a while it was. But then came the fallout. I thought Emma's theatrics were done. I thought that when she walked out of my office after her over-the-top "please take me back" stunt, she'd finally let go. But no, life had other plans, and apparently so did Emma. It all began with a package. One morning, a small, nondescript box showed up on my doorstep. No return address, no note, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. I almost didn't open it. Honestly, I was half expecting glitter or some weird post-breakup prank, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was something I hadn't seen in weeks. Her engagement ring. Or rather, our engagement ring. For a second, I froze. My first thought was, is this her way of apologizing? Returning the ring like it's some kind of symbolic gesture? But then I noticed something strange. The ring wasn't as I'd left it. The diamond, the same one I'd spent months saving for, was gone. In its place was a tiny folded piece of paper, wedged into the empty setting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The message was short but chilling. Come find me. You owe me that much. If this were a horror movie, this is the part where the audience would be yelling, "Don't go!" But here's the thing. I went. Not because I thought there was anything to salvage between us, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over. And I was right. The note led me to a small park near the river, one of our old spots from when we first started dating. It was deserted, except for Emma, sitting on a bench with a notebook in her lap. She looked different, tired, unkempt, like she hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She didn't say anything when I approached, just motioned for me to sit. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. And then, in the most dramatic move of all, she handed me the notebook. "Read it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll understand." The notebook was filled with entries, messy handwriting sprawling across every page. At first, it seemed like a journal, ramblings about her trip, her so-called journey of self-discovery. But the further I read, the darker it got. She wrote about how she'd started questioning everything. Her choices, her friends, her life with me. She talked about feeling trapped in a perfect relationship that left no room for her to grow. And then, about halfway through, she wrote something that made my blood run cold. I thought I could fix myself by leaving. But now I realize maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's always been him. The entries spiraled from there, jumping from regret to anger to something that felt dangerously close to obsession. She wrote about watching my Instagram posts while she was abroad, dissecting every photo, every caption. She wrote about dreaming of the life we could have had if only things had been different. And then, in the final entry, she wrote, "If I can't have the life I wanted with him, maybe I'll make sure he doesn't have it with anyone else." I closed the notebook, my hands shaking. "Emma," I said, my voice low, "what the hell is this?" She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "It's the truth," she said. "I didn't know how to tell you, so I wrote it down." I stared at her, trying to process everything. Was this some kind of twisted apology? A confession? Or something worse? Before I could ask, she stood up, slipping her hands into her coat pockets. "I just needed you to see me, Ryan," she said, her voice trembling. "Not who you thought I was. Not who I pretended to be. Just me." And then, as quickly as she appeared, she walked away, leaving me standing in the park with a notebook in my hands. I haven't seen her since that day. I don't know if she meant the things she wrote, or if it was just another attempt to manipulate me. But one thing's for sure. Emma didn't find herself in South Asia. She lost herself, and she almost took me down with her. I wish I could say that was the last chapter of the Emma saga, but life doesn't tie itself up with neat little bows. I didn't realize it at the time, but the notebook she handed me in the park wasn't her exit. It was her encore. And the show wasn't over yet. A week passed without a word from her. Part of me hoped she'd moved on, while another part kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then it did, but not in the way I expected. I got a call from Danny, the same friend who'd spilled the tea about Emma's behavior earlier. Her voice was frantic, and the first thing she said was, "Ryan, you need to get down to the gallery. Now." Gallery? I hadn't set foot in one since college, back when I used to tag along to Emma's art shows. She was always obsessed with the idea of expressing herself creatively, but never seemed to follow through. So when Danny told me Emma had rented out an entire gallery for a one-night-only exhibit, my curiosity was piqued, and my gut told me it wasn't going to be good. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how small the space was. The second thing I noticed was the crowd. People milled around, sipping wine and murmuring to each other as they stared at the walls. And on those walls? Pictures of me. Well, not exactly pictures. Paintings, sketches, and collages of me. Some were abstract, distorted beyond recognition, while others were disturbingly lifelike. One massive piece dominated the far wall, a surreal image of me standing in the middle of a field, my head replaced by a cracked hourglass spilling sand. The title? Wasted Time. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots as I took it all in. This wasn't just art. It was a public dissection of our relationship, curated for an audience of strangers. Each piece had a title, each title a jab. The Cage of Comfort, Promises on Repeat, The Man Who Forgot to See Me. Danny appeared at my side, her face a mix of sympathy and awkward amusement. I told you it was bad, she said, gesturing to a smaller piece nearby. It was a charcoal sketch of me holding a mirror that reflected nothing but darkness. The caption read, Blind Love. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or walk out. On one hand, this was petty even by Emma's standards. On the other hand, there was something disturbingly impressive about the lengths she'd gone to air our dirty laundry in the most pretentious way possible. And then I saw her. She was standing near the corner, talking animatedly to a small group of people who were clearly enthralled by her artistic vision. She looked radiant in that maddening way she always did when she had an audience. But when her eyes met mine, the mask slipped for just a second. I saw something there. Fear, regret, maybe even shame, but it was gone before I could be sure. She walked over, and the crowd parted like she was Moses and I was the Red Sea. Ryan, she said, her voice calm but calculated. You came. I gestured to the walls around us. Hard to miss when I'm the main event. She smiled, that same infuriating smile that used to melt me, but now just made me want to scream. This isn't about you, she said, her tone almost condescending. It's about us. About what we meant. About what I lost. Emma, I said, keeping my voice steady. You didn't lose anything. You threw it away. And now you're trying to turn it into some kind of performance piece. Her smile faltered, just slightly. You don't understand, she said. This is my way of processing. My way of healing. Está de here, dom fundo. Healing? I gestured to the crowd. Emma, this isn't healing. This is exploitation. You've turned our relationship into a spectacle. And for what? A little validation? Some wine and cheese. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The crowd had grown quieter, people pretending not to listen while clearly eavesdropping. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping just enough to show the cracks in her facade. I thought this would help, she said softly. But maybe I was wrong. That was the closest I'd ever gotten to an admission of guilt from Emma. And it was enough. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her and her gallery behind. It's been a month since that night. I haven't heard from her since, and I've made peace with the fact that I probably never will. Sometimes I wonder what became of her, but not often, because for the first time in a long time, I've stopped looking back. Let her find herself. I've already found something better, my freedom.